Thank you. First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody to the Cesar Chavez event. We will have a keynote speaker today, Andre Chavez, grandson of Cesar Chavez. One of the famous things that he was famous for, Cesar Chavez, is "Si se puede." That means it can be done, or yes, you can. Here at the college, I believe that if we put our minds to it, we can do it. So, si se puede. Si se puede. I first of all like to welcome and recognize our president of Barstow Community College, Dr. Eva Bag. Would you please stand? I'd also like to recognize our Associated Student Government. My name is Sui Motufao, and I'm your ASG president. We have Ba'a Motufao, please stand. He's our student trustee. Ariel Looney, our Region 9 rep. Calvin Alozi, who's our treasurer. Jonathan Robles, our secretary. Fatima Abbas, and she can't be in, she's at lab right now. Tiare Alifayo, the senator. Senator Ozell Wilson. And how can I forget my right hand? Margie Smith, my VP. Our ICC VP, Bernice. And Haiwan Yang, he's also in class. And Tayu Fei, who's also in class. We have our Director of Student Life and Development, Ms. Joanne Garcia. I'd like to recognize our Barstow College Promise Manager, Ms. Melissa Meadows. I'd also like to recognize our Student Services Vice President, Ms. Karen King. We have several sponsors, and I'd like to recognize them right now. Student Success and Equity. Barstow Community College EEO. Associated Student Government, thank you very much. All our faculty and our staff, our students, thank you all for coming. And I'd like to give this time over to our president, Dr. Eva Bag, who will be presenting our keynote speaker. Thank you so much. Si se puede, everybody, si se puede.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. I see faculty, students, staff. We have Trustee Tim Hayden here. Thank you for coming. I think we may have community members because we've gotten the word out as much as possible because we have such an honored guest here this afternoon. And I just got to meet Mr. Andre Chavez just a few minutes ago. And I'll tell you, we are very fortunate to have him. You've got in your pamphlet today a bit about his background. He has a very famous grandfather, Cesar Chavez, but you can see that already Andre has quite a resume himself at just 24 years old. He told me that he started doing public speaking when he was just 16 years old. So he is on a fast pace to doing, continuing the good work that he's already done with the Chavez Foundation and supporting education. He has a degree from Cal State Bakersfield, and he talked very positively about community colleges and the value of community colleges. And he's been traveling around the nation recently in Michigan, Texas, and he told me that this facility is one of the nicest that he's been at. So he's very complimentary, very nice young gentleman. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Andre and let him explain about his father, his history, and his motivation for making positive change in the world.
Well, thank you for the kind introduction. First, on behalf of the Cesar Chavez Foundation, the Chavez family, and all of us in the farm worker movement, we want to thank you all for inviting us to share a little bit about my grandfather's life and legacy. But before I begin, I want to thank a few individuals. Once again, I want to thank President Bagg for the kind introduction. We had a wonderful conversation. I think we have a lot of things in common, so that's nice, and that makes me feel more at home. So I appreciate the hospitality so far. I also want to thank the entire administration for coming out as well, and Trustee Heighton for joining us this afternoon. And also Joanne Garcia. Joanne, where are you at? She's probably other, she's in back. Joanne, thank you very much for putting this all together. I think what started off as a random email turned into me being here, so I'm very excited to be here. And then I want to thank all the student organizations, student government, and everybody else for inviting me out, just to share a little bit about who my grandfather is. And I want to acknowledge two more people before I forget. Chris Clark, who helped greet me. Chris, thank you for and I also want to thank Ed Will, who's up there in sound booth. I can't see him, but very accommodating. So thank you, Ed. Before we begin today's discussion and celebration, it's only fitting that we do so in the tradition of the farm worker movement. Before we have any event honoring farm workers or any event honoring my grandfather's life, we always start off with the farm workers clap. Some people know it as a unity applause, some people know it as a solidarity applause. Anybody familiar with it? Okay, well, I think once I start it, people will get the hang of it, but I'm asking everybody to participate just so we can get started off on the right note. For those of you whose first time it was doing that, I think you recognize very early on that it's very powerful. It's something to kind of get things going, and so that's something that we always do at all of our events. So I've done it with as many as 10 people. I've done it with as few as 10 people to 5,000 people in a convention center, and every single time I get the chills. So I always like to do that. It helps get me going, but it's also what we've always done since the beginning of when we started this movement back in the 1960s. Earlier this month, on March 10th, we celebrated a historic day in American history. It was 50 years ago in 1968 that Senator Robert F. Kennedy joined my grandfather, Cesar Chavez, in the small Central Valley town of Delano, California, to break his 1968 fast for 25 days for nonviolence. And so earlier this month, we were with the Kennedy family in downtown Los Angeles at Robert Kennedy High School to commemorate this event, and we produced a short video. It's about 10 minutes, and I want to show this video because this is going to give you a nice understanding of this historic event that we're commemorating. So Ed, when you get a chance, could we cue up the video?
In the dusty town of Delano, California, an unassuming man touched the hearts of millions of Americans and changed history. His convictions were so deeply held, he was willing to risk his life for them. The son of immigrants, Cesar was born in 1927 on his family's farm near Yuma, Arizona. The Chavezes were poor, but Cesar enjoyed a wholesome life surrounded by family.
It was fun being in a farm. When you're a kid, you have animals to feed and to water and all the kind of chores that you have in the farm, That's fun, So that's what Cesar used to do.
They lost the farm in the Depression. Cesar and his family were thrust into the migrant stream, following the crops in California. Like many others, they fell victim to the harsh realities of miserable working conditions, poverty, and racism.
Yeah, it was very hard when we left Arizona. We lived under a tent, under a tree, where we could get a barn. We never had a house when we were migrant workers. Boxes were tables and chairs and beds.
As with many from his generation, Cesar's hope was to escape the fields in search of better opportunities. His chance came working with the community service organization, where he learned the power of organizing people, registering and turning them out to vote, and battling police brutality. Yet Cesar never forgot the humiliation of the fields.
And I remember him clearly saying that somebody had to do something about this. Is not right. Somebody had to do something about it.
So he gave up the only good paying job he ever had and moved his young family back to Delano, determined to settle a score. All attempts to organize farm workers were brutally crushed by growers who used violence and pitted one race against another. That ended when Filipino and Latino grape strikers made history by joining forces to overcome the industry that oppressed them for so long. Two and a half years went by. Strikers nonviolently manned picket lines from dawn until dusk in the heat and cold. Initial enthusiasm wore off. Many strikers lost their homes. Others left. Those who stayed were discouraged as no end was in sight. Facing abuse and taunts by the growers, some male strikers were angry and frustrated, talking of violence.
We weren't winning, you know. And so some people thought that maybe they started burning stuff and breaking bones and cracking heads, and maybe they would listen to us.
Cesar felt he had failed as a leader. The time for talking was over. It was time for action.
And so he says, I'm going to do a fast for nonviolence.
So as an act of penance for what he saw as his shortcomings, Cesar stopped eating and only drank water. Over the next 25 days, Cesar endured hunger pains as his body steadily weakened. He lost 35 pounds. Doctors warned of permanent damage to his organs and even death. Farm workers and people from all over came to Delano, first by the hundreds and then by the thousands. Cesar fasted in a tiny room inside the union's adobe brick co-op gas station on its 40 acres property outside Delano. Many brought religious offerings. Daily mass was celebrated. A tent city went up. Cesar refused interviews with reporters, but he spent much of the time receiving and talking with farm workers. The union did more organizing during the fast than at any time in its history. While Cesar got weaker, the union grew stronger. It was 1968. The Vietnam War was raging. The ghettos were ablaze with civil disorder. Cesar offered a different vision. He believed Americans hungered for nonviolent solutions.
See, nonviolence is more powerful than violence. But, you know, once we are able to understand it and accept it and experiment with it and be successful with it, it's not difficult to keep.
He said, I've been thinking, said, we're going to go out there and boycott grapes. You know what a boycott is? But most of us didn't know what the word meant, you know.
The strike went beyond the vineyards as the great boycott spread across the U.S. and Canada. People from all walks of life saw Cesar suffering and asked what more they could do. Support came from far and wide, from homemakers and consumers to students and activists to labor, civil rights, and religious leaders. All this because one man was prepared to die for his beliefs. Support also came from Senator Robert Kennedy, who who took on the growers during his first visit to Delano 2 years before for Senate hearings on the grape strike.
Most interesting, who told you that they're going to riot?
The men right out in the field that they were talking to said, if you don't get them out of here, we're going to cut their hearts out.
How can you go arrest somebody if they haven't violated the law?
They're ready to violate the law. In other words,
Could I suggest in the interim period of time, the luncheon period of time, that the sheriff and the district attorney read the Constitution of the United States?
Cesar's fast also profoundly touched Robert Kennedy. Kennedy and Chavez came from very different worlds. One was white, the other Latino. One was from the Northeast, the other from the Southwest. One came from great wealth, the other from great poverty. Yet they also shared much in common. Both took inspiration from their faith. They were both firmly dedicated to serving others. And they both fervently believed in the promise of this nation, that all of its people were entitled to equality and opportunity.
Until that man, that great brown man, who we
The fast forced people to answer the questions about violence for themselves. Some left because they disagreed with Cesar, yet the hearts and minds of those who remained were changed. After the strikers recommitted themselves to nonviolence, the fast ended on March 10, 1968, at an outdoor mass in a Delano park with thousands of farm workers and supporters. Senator Kennedy said, "I am here out of respect for one of the heroic figures of our time, Cesar Chavez."
Cesar Chavez is needed. That kind of influence that's committed to nonviolence is desperately needed for these people and for the country as a whole.
Cesar was too weak to speak, so others read his statement for him. It concluded,
When we are really honest with ourselves, we must admit that our lives are all that truly belong to us. So it is how we use our lives that determines what kind of men we are. It is my deepest belief that only by giving our lives do we find life. I'm convinced that the truest act of courage, the strongest act of manliness, is to sacrifice ourselves for others in a totally nonviolent struggle for justice. To be a man is to suffer for others. God help us to be men.
after 2.5 years of more struggle and hardship, the boycott convinced grape growers to sign their first union contracts, establishing the United Farm Workers as the first enduring farm worker union in U.S. history. Cesar Chavez became more than the leader of farm workers. He became a moral leader for all Americans. At the end of the fast, Robert Kennedy told the crowd, "When your children and your grandchildren take their place in America, going to high school and college and taking good jobs and good pay, when you look at them, you will say, 'I did this. I was there at the point of difficulty and danger.' And though you may be old and bent from many years of labor, no man will stand taller than you when you say, 'I marched with Caesar.'"
This finishes up. I know I stand between you and lunch, so I will try to speed it up because I think it's lunchtime right now. But when when I finish up, I also want to let you know if you have any questions, I'm also willing to take question and answer depending on how much time we have. But as you saw in the video, 2.5 years after Filipino and Latinos joined forces, the strike had hit a low point. You see, the winter of 1968 was a real struggle for the farm worker movement. The strike had been going on for 2.5 years now. Many strikers and farm workers had lost their homes, they had lost their cars, and they were really down on their luck. You know, knowing that the farm workers were feeling down, the growers, the people who owned the farms and their allies, decided that they were going to go back to their favorite tactic, which was violence to further deter the farm workers' cause. Growing angry and frustrated, as you saw, with the violence being used against them, some farm workers talked of retaliation. But as a response, my thought that Cesar decided that he was going to stop eating and rededicate himself and the movement to nonviolence. You see, there's something that you have to understand about my thought that Cesar is that he was very old school. He didn't believe in taking shortcuts. And he thought that violence was a shortcut to which people turn out of anger and frustration. He also recognized that to many people at first glance, nonviolence looked kind of weak. But he also believed that it was most powerful in action. He understood that if the strikers had committed themselves to nonviolence, if they had persistence and determination, then change would come. But most importantly, for him, nonviolence was a moral issue. He saw all human life as a precious gift, a gift from God, and no one, grower or farm worker, had the right to take that for any reason. You know, I think it's important that we not only remember this 50-year anniversary as a historical event, but as a source. Senator Kennedy spoke at the Mass, my grandfather's fast. He talked about how people had come together in this nation at the point of difficulty and danger. And I think today, like in 1968, we come together at another time of difficulty and danger. You see, every day we see our communities under attack. Shortly after the inauguration, when Muslims were targeted and there was the ban, it wasn't only an attack on Muslims, but it was an attack on everybody who believes in humanity and treating others with respect and dignity. When torch-bearing Nazis, Klansmen, and white supremacists marching in Charlottesville, Virginia, were tolerated and treated the same as the people protesting those evils, it was an attack on every decent man, woman, and child in this nation. I think we can all agree here that building walls doesn't build community nor bring people together. That takes building bridges. And ending DACA, which some of you may benefit from in this room, would deny dreamers the future and the prosperity, the only thing that most of them have ever known. And that sure as hell doesn't show them the prosperity. That sure as hell doesn't show them the beauty and the boundless land. I think in order for my peers, for the dreamers around this land, we must keep our families together and continue to create a better tomorrow. These attacks and the fact that they're treated as a new political norm are rooted in hatred, bigotry, and divisiveness, and they do nothing for the prosperity and the progress of this country. However, you being here today, whether you're here for free lunch or not, but you being here today in these seats and taking time out of your busy schedules, and you doing everything that you can to further your education, does everything to promote the prosperity and the well-being of this nation. You know, for many of us, our road to a brighter future is not going to come easily. Throughout this journey, we'll see our fair share of trials and tribulations, and we'll have to overcome many challenges and obstacles. There's going to be times when we feel like giving up, when we feel like quitting, when we ask ourselves the question, why am I doing this? But it's during these times that it's most important that we remember the legacy of my Tata Cesar Chavez. What few people know is that my grandfather actually faced more defeats than victories, but it was how he responded to the defeats that defined his legacy. At the age of 25, my dad, Paul Chavez, was asked by my grandpa to become the United Farm Workers political director. And the first big task that he was assigned with was to block an anti-farm worker appointee to the State Farm Labor Board. So my dad launched this huge statewide lobbying campaign, sending hundreds of farm workers and supporters to legislators, capital offices, and to their offices in their home districts. A lot of time and resources were put into this one vote because this person could be detrimental to the progress of the farm workers' cause. On the final day of legislative session, at around 11:30 p.m., the final vote was taken. So those of you familiar with legislative session, it goes super late into the night. They usually take up the most controversial bills at the very end. And so it's about 11:30 at night, and my tata, Cesar, and my dad joined about 300 other farm workers to watch the final vote be taken in the state Senate gallery. One by one, the senators voted, and the final vote was cast. And when they did the math, they saw that their efforts had come up one vote short. As a 25-year-old man, you can imagine how my dad felt. He was absolutely devastated. Not only did he let down his dad, but he also let down a whole lot of farm workers. My dad looked at my dad and he was disappointed and said, "Let's drive home." Now the trip from Sacramento, California to Keene, California, just outside Tehachapi, is about a 5-hour drive. So they wouldn't be getting home until about 6 in the morning. About an hour into the car ride, my tata looks over at my dad. There's dead silence and asks him, "Did you try as hard as you could?" And my dad looks at him and goes, "Yes, I did everything I could possibly do." Again, my tata asked, "Did you leave any stone unturned?" And he said, "No, I did everything I knew how to do. I did everything that was asked of me." My tata paused, took a deep breath and said, "You have to understand that our work isn't like a baseball game, where after 9 innings, the team with the most amount of runs is the winners and the others are losers. It's not a political race where on election day, the candidate who has the most votes wins and the others lose. In our work, the fight for people, you only lose when you give up and when you stop fighting. So when we get home, we're going to get some rest, we're going to wake up in the morning, we're going to dust ourselves off, and we're going to work twice as hard." So for many of us in the room today, like I said earlier, this is just the beginning of our journey. But it is important that we remember this story and also Cesar's example. Because if a poor brown kid who was the son of immigrants, only went to the 8th grade, was able to achieve his dreams of improving the conditions for farm workers and make this world a better place, then there's absolutely no reason why any of us in this room cannot achieve the things that we set out to do. However, we must always remember the words, "Si se puede," and recognize that these words weren't just a rally cry of the movement of the 1960s, but that they're alive and well today and will be in the future to get us through whatever we decide to do in this world. So I want to thank you very much for your time, and si se puede.
Thank you. Can we give him another round of applause? We're going to have a Q&A outside immediately after this session. We actually have, I'll be handing it over to Dr. Bags so she can present our speaker with again. Thank you.
On behalf of all of us, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm still recovering. It was hurting. Thank you.
Always.
I just wanted to remind everyone, in the words of Cesar Chavez, he says that you must become a servant of the people. When you do, you can demand their commitment in return. That was one of his famous sayings. So if you want commitment from people, it's not by force. It's by committing yourself and your will, and people will come in. They will commit to you. You don't have to do it by force like what we've seen in the video. So with that being said, si se puede, everyone? Yes, we can. And we will be having Los Domingos catered lunch out there. We have 2 exits, and on both sides, you guys can go on both sides to get your lunch. And if you like, we have seating out there. You guys can eat here, or you guys can take it with you. We also have Q&A outside with Cesar Chavez, his grandson. If you'd like to speak to him and take pictures with him, his name is Andres Chavez, and he'll be outside. Thank you so much. Thank you for all coming.